Well, here's our explanation for free will.
Ouais. Ok. En fait, quand il y a identification
When
mentale,
there's identification to
on
the
a la
mind,
sensation
we
qu'il y a
feel
un
like
libre arbitre
free will
parce qu'on
exists because we
s'identifie
identify
aux
to the
créations
mind
mentales
creations
qui
which
apparaissent
appear,
et on a l'impression
and
de
we
faire un
feel like
choix
we're
parmi
making
ces
a choice
créations mentales.
amongst those mind creations.
Alors que
Whereas when
lorsqu'on
we
commence
start
à appréhender la vie
apprehending
depuis un
light
autre
from
espace,
another
depuis
space, the
l'espace
space
du
of
cœur,
heart,
on se rend
we
compte
come
que
to
c'est
realize it's
toujours un élan
always a
spontané
spontaneous
qui
drive that
va
will
orienter la
lead the
direction.
course.
Et
And
avec le discernement,
given
on peut
some
même se rendre compte
discernment, we
que
can even notice that
lorsqu'il y a
when
plein de créations
facing
mentales qui
numerous
apparaissent, par exemple,
mind creations, for instance,
la
the
notion de
notion of
choix
choice
n'en est pas vraiment
isn't really
une
one
parce
because
qu'il y a un
there's
élan
a
spontané
spontaneous
qui va
drive that
t'amener
will lead you
irrésistiblement
irresistibly
à aller
towards
vers
one
une pensée plutôt
thought
que telle
rather
autre,
than another,
une
a
direction de
life
vie plutôt que
direction
telle autre,
rather than
etc.
another, etc.
Donc en fait,
So
quand on
when
est
we
identifié au mental, on
identify
a
to the mind,
l'impression qu'il y
it
a un libre
feels like
arbitre
we
parce qu'on a
have free will
l'impression
because it appears like
par exemple, d'avoir une
we're going
réflexion
through
et qu'au
some
terme de cette
reflections
réflexion,
inducing
d'arriver
a
à un
choice,
choix, alors qu'en réalité,
while
ça n'a jamais
actually
été
it's never been
le
the
fruit de la
fruit
réflexion qui nous
of that
amène
reflection that has
à
led
cette
us to
conclusion,
that
mais
particular
ça a toujours
conclusion,
été
but
un
rather
élan
it's
du
always
cœur,
been
on
a
pourrait dire
drive from the heart
un élan de vie,
and
en fait,
impulse of
spontané.
life, spontaneous.
Donc,
So
objectivement, il n'y a pas de libre
objectively,
arbitre.
there's no such thing as
Et
free
si on va
will.
encore un
And
petit peu
if we
plus loin,
go a little
on se rend
further,
compte que ces
we
créations,
realize
justement,
those
que ce soit
actual
les créations
creations,
mentales
may
ou
they
toutes les
be
autres
mind
créations du monde
creations
d'ailleurs,
or any other kind
sont
of
totalement
creations,
spontanées.
actually, they are completely
Et la question
spontaneous.
qu'on
And
pose
there's a
souvent
question we often ask
aux gens en
during
satsang
satsang:
avec Gérald, c'est est-ce que
can
tu
you
peux dire
tell
quelle serait la
what
nature
will
de ta
be the
prochaine
nature of your
pensée,
next thought?
quel
What
sera son
will be the
contenu,
content of it?
quand est-ce qu'elle va apparaître,
When will it
etc.
appear, etc.,
Et
etc.?
personne ne peut
No
le
one can
prévoir.
predict that.
Donc ça veut dire
So
que
it
déjà, si à
means
la base, on ne peut pas
from
prévoir
this
la
very
création,
basis, if we
alors
can't predict
effectivement, il y a
creation,
obligatoirement
well, then it
aucun libre
inevitably
arbitre.
means that
Que tout
there's
se
no
fait
free will.
spontanément.
Everything
La
happens
création
spontaneously.
arrive spontanément et la
Creations appears
réponse
spontaneously, and the answer
à cette
to that
création qui se
creation
manifeste
also
arrive aussi
manifesting
tout à
appears
fait
completely
spontanément. Tout est
spontaneously.
spontané.
Everything is spontaneous.
Et ça peut
It may
paraître
seem
triste
sad when
quand on
we
se dit,
say during
en fait, non,
satsang
il n'y a
there's
pas de
no
libre
free
arbitre.
will,
Mais
but
en fait, c'est pas
actually
triste
it's
du
not
tout
sad
parce
at
que
all.
la joie ne vient
Joy
pas
doesn't come
des
from the
situations du film.
scenes of the movie.
Ça vient
Doesn't
pas
come from the
de
appearance of a
l'apparence d'un
choice we
choix
would
qu'on
have
aura fait
made in
dans
this
cette vie,
life,
d'une
from
direction de
a
vie,
direction of
etc.
life, etc.
La joie, c'est de notre
Joy
nature même.
is our very nature,
Et en réalité, c'est
and
pas assujetti
the
à
truth
quelque
is,
chose qu'on
it's not
fait
bound to something we do
ou
or
qu'on aurait dû
that we should
faire,
have done,
etc.
etc.
Donc voilà pour
There you
la
are,
question
on
du
the
libre
matter of free will.
Ah là là,
Well,
on pourrait
well,
pas dire mieux.
we
hein.
couldn't put it better if we tried.
Ouais, c'est le mental
It
qui
is
fait
the
croire
mind
que
indeed
c'est
that
totalement
makes you
libre
believe that
arbitre,
free will
que,
exists. It
il
leads
amène
to the
à créer des
creation of
histoires
stories
qui vont
that
amener
will lead
le
the
personnage à
character to
penser
come to believe that there
qu'il y a
is a
une
direction
direction, une
and orientation.
orientation,
It's
une
a
structure de
structure
pensée en fait
of thoughts that
qui amène
brings the character
le
always
personnage à croire
to
qu'il
believe that
décide. En fait,
they're
c'est
deciding,
lui qui prend la décision
that
de.
they're the one
Bien
making
entendu,
the
c'est faux, comme le
decision.
disait Pierre.
Well, obviously
Comme
that's
l'élan
false.
est spontané
As
et ça vient du
Pierre was
cœur.
saying, the drive is
Derrière ça,
spontaneous
il peut
and
pas
it
y avoir
comes from the heart.
d'élaboration d'un scénario.
And behind that,
Alors, il y a
there's
des
no
gens qui
room
disent, oui,
for
mais
an
alors ça, c'est
elaboration
le
of a
divin ou
script.
autre. Non,
And
non,
some people will
ça, c'est
talk
même le
about a
divin parce
divine
que
scenario, but no,
même
there's no
si le
such
divin,
thing as a
l'absolu
divine
et tout ça,
scenario. Even
ne
the divine or the
structure rien.
absolute doesn't
Parce que pour
structure
structurer
anything,
quelque
because
chose, il faut
for
qu'il y ait
structure to
une
happen, it
personnalité qui
requires
soit
a
le personnage.
personality, a
Tout est
character.
vraiment entièrement
So
spontané.
everything is truly
Alors,
entirely
c'est vrai qu'il y
spontaneous.
a les gens qui se posent la
And
question en
some
disant,
people
ouais, mais
will
pourquoi
ask,
c'est pas la même
why
chose pour tout
isn't
le
it the
monde?
same for everyone then?
Simplement parce
Well,
que la
simply
conscience
because
a la
consciousness has,
possibilité,
quote unquote,
entre
the
guillemets, de la
possibility of
manifestation, se
multiplying itself
démultiplier
in this manifestation
à l'infini.
indefinitely. And even
Et du
there,
coup, même là, c'est
it's
spontané
also
aussi.
spontaneous.
Du coup, à chaque fois, ça
Therefore,
sera
it will
différent.
be different every time,
Voilà,
but it
ça sera
always
toujours
will be
spontané. Rien n'est
spontaneous.
décidé à
Nothing's
l'avance.
decided in
Par
advance.
contre, on peut le
Should
dire
we put it into
comme ça.
words?
Donc, et puis
And
même, à
even
partir du
from the
moment où vous
moment
partez du
you
cœur,
follow
le
the
cœur est
heart
spontané,
is spontaneous. And
que
what's
si
underlying
dans
that
ça n'a pas de
has
limite,
no
pas de fin,
beginning, no
c'est
end,
infini,
it's
où serait
infinite.
la place d'un libre
Then
arbitre?
where would you
Ça n'a
find
aucun
room for
sens.
free will? It doesn't make sense anymore. Actually, we are already free by our very nature, and freedom has no need to wait for a will. There's nothing to be willed for. So free will is inevitably defining a story that would be prepared in advance with multiple choices available, and we would choose this one or this one, etc. And that's the impression we get. This impression we get comes from the mind, the ego. Those are the ones inducing the idea that we're choosing between a direction or another, but the truth is it doesn't exist. If we manage to put aside the mind and those kind of egotistical spontaneities, then inevitably we realize that truly everything appears like that. I do know it sounds strange. Well, indeed, it is a bit. And people tell me, well, then it comes from nowhere, doesn't it? Well, kind of, yeah. It's not localized. It just appears like that. So truly, there's no free will. We believe there's one, but it's a belief. It's truly just a belief. Sometimes there's a confusion when we tell people during satsang that everyone is already free by nature. People then imagine themselves as a person being free, whereas what we're talking about, the realization, is that freedom lies beyond the belief of being a person. The idea is we're not a person who is free, but rather we're consciousness which is free and plays the role of a person, but without identifying to the person. As long as identification to the character is running, well, then we don't feel free inevitably, because freedom is beyond, you could say, the plane of the world, outside the world, beyond that. The same way Jesus was saying the kingdom is not of this world, well, then true freedom is not of this world. It's not where it lies, where it stands. And so the very notion of free will drops entirely when we realize time doesn't exist. If there's no time, there can't be a notion of free will. But that issue is a little bit more complicated. To the mind, it is utterly incomprehensible, the no-time notion, because mind is only made of time, only made of temporality. The mind is only made of thoughts appearing, lasting a certain amount of time, and then disappearing. And it will constantly reactivate a sort of time frame, a historical timeline, exactly like in primary school, where there was a historical freeze of humanity from prehistory to now. Well, the mind does the same thing with everybody's life, giving the impression that time is passing. But if we're not identified to those creations of the mind anymore, we realize there's no time. There's only a now, constant, the same now, always the same, within which the totality appears, the totality of forms, may they be mental forms, physical forms, energetic, etc. But what we truly are is not subject to temporality, unless we're identified to memory, which might give us the impression that time might pass. But the truth is, there's no time passing. It's quite funny, because by asking this question, we've ended up talking about a whole amount of things. We've actually answered many of the questions. It wasn't only about free will, all the rest was also included, as all subjects are interconnected. Obviously, the moment you talk about one of them, you talk about all the rest.